Warm welcome to all the participants in today's webinar. The IT and BPO industry was projected to rebound in 2025 after nearly 3 years of decline. However, macroeconomic headwinds pose significant challenges to that, and the rapid adoption of AI is reshaping deal structures and economics. So in today's webinar, we will explore trends related to cost and pricing of outsourcing deals in the first of 2025. We'll also examine the exact impact that AI is having on deal structures and value realization. Lastly, we will talk about the evolving pricing dynamics of software and cloud platforms and discuss what these shifts mean for buyers and providers. But to kick off things, we will actually start with a poll. So if we move to the next slide, please. If we move to the poll, it's a simple poll that the audience will now see on the screens. Just take a moment to think about the key IT and BPO services contracts, and then share your inputs on whether pricing has declined in 2025 relative to 2024, or is it the same, or has it increased? Okay, we'll stop the poll in about 20 seconds. Okay, so we have got pretty much of a mixed verdict. 29% of the people are saying that pricing has declined in 2025. 35% are saying that it is about the same, and 35% are saying that it has increased. So seems like there's a lot of confusion, no clear trends, and it's not surprising. We will definitely talk about the exact trends that we have seen within a few minutes. But broadly speaking, these are times where, while on the one hand, we are seeing costs increasing, which ideally should lead to pricing also increasing in tandem. But because of a lot of macroeconomic situations and industry specific nuances, that's not really happening. I think it's a perfect segue to kind of move to the next slide, where, I'll ask Vipin to talk more in detail about those aspects.
Thank you, Rahul. Interesting insights coming out of the poll, right? So we've been seeing similar pricing trends in our conversations with clients as well. There is general confusion that's being prevailed. So if we zoom out and look at the larger trend, right? So we had seen a sharp post-COVID recovery fueled by policy momentum and Fed-infused liquidity. However, in 23 and 24, we had seen global services industry grow at a moderate pace of around 3 to 4% annually. But halfway into 2025, the mood is more cautious now, and we are anticipating relatively muted growth for this year. Diving into the specifics of what we're actually seeing on ground. And it's a mixed bag with both positives and pressures playing out. So let's start with the headwinds that the industry is facing, right? Firstly, enterprise spending continues to be cautious. Also, we are observing decision cycles are taking longer time to materialize. Also, we are seeing an uptick in insourcing and vendor consolidation initiatives, especially among large enterprises. And that's putting pressure on new deal activity. There's also the looming risk of tariff escalation, although it seems it remains contained for now, but it may pose as a risk factor in the near future. And then there is the margin story. Talent cost inflation continues in most locations, but pricing has largely remained flat, and that's causing a real margin squeeze for service providers. Although these headwinds persist, we are also observing some green shoots. We are seeing strong momentum in GCC setups, especially from sectors that were largely underpenetrated till now. These are typically first time adopters of the global delivery model. We are also seeing increased traction in offshore and nearshore regions as onshore locations are facing higher cost and margin pressures. And importantly, talent shortages in source countries are nudging firms to expand into offshore hubs where they can access talent faster and at scale. So, to sum all these up, right? The global services market is still growing, but the pace is definitely slowing, and the growth is expected to come, or the next run of growth is expected to come from offshore location. Moving on to the next slide. Uh, We've been observing a continued divergence between cost and price movements over the past year. But here's the thing for 2025. Margin pressures are definitely intensifying. And this pressure is not limited to one region. It's playing out across all geographies. Let's focus for a moment on offshore markets. So when we say offshore, right, we are referring to low cost delivery locations like India, Philippines, Malaysia, amongst others. Costs in these markets continue to rise, primarily due to inflation and wage hikes. That said, in some of these countries, we have also seen currency depreciation, which has helped a little in offsetting some of the cost inflation elements. But from a pricing perspective, things have largely remained flat. If we look at the past 5 to 6 months, right, pricing across IT and BP services has shown very little movement. In fact, we are starting to see some selective rate card declines as well. For instance, in voice BPS, pricing has dropped by around 1 to 3%, and that's already translating into margin erosion for some service providers. When it comes to IT application development and IT infra services, we have seen a pricing dip of around 1 to 1.5% on average. In order to circumvent these margin pressures, right, providers have increased the adoption of low cost geographies and tier 2 cities typically. These locations have proven to be more cost effective from a delivery standpoint, and in many cases, providers have actually been able to maintain or even improve their margins using this strategy. The important thing to note here is as more and more providers enter these tier 2 cities, pricing pressures is creeping in there as well. So this is the perspective on offshore locations. So now moving on to the viewpoint on nearshore locations. So what we're seeing is when it comes to nearshore locations, the situation is actually a bit more challenging than offshore. For context, when we say nearshore, we are talking about mid-cost geographies, places like Poland, Romania, Mexico, Costa Rica, and etc. Your typical Central Eastern Europe and LATAM locations, right? Now, unlike offshore locations, these regions don't benefit from currency depreciation. In fact, in many cases, right, we have seen currency appreciation against the dollar in certain countries. And that's made things worse because rising exchange rates are pushing up costs even further for service providers. So when we look at functions like IT ADM, IT infra, voice BPS, the cost deltas are higher in nearshore locations than in offshore regions. Moving on to the pricing front, right? Over the past 12 to 18 months, we did see notable price increases in markets like Poland, Romania, and Mexico, among others, largely due to high inflation, geopolitical factors, and tight supply conditions. But for this year, what we are observing is a bit of a double whammy for these locations. Costs are still rising, although the pace has eased out a little in recent times. At the same time, price hasn't moved much. Price increases have been muted roughly to around 1 to 1.9% at best. Uh, so margins are still under pressure, right? So that said, there's an interesting outlier that we are seeing. For specialized application development roles, providers have actually been able to increase rates modestly. So if you look closely, you'll notice that the price spread in IT ADM is a bit wider compared to non-voice BPS or IT infra services. This is likely because the demand gap for these specialized skills is still steady while the supply hasn't caught up. So net-net, the situation in nearshore remains relatively tight. Uh, Now moving on to the perspective on onshore locations. So in onshore locations, what we're seeing is, as we know, right? So onshore locations continue to play a critical role in IT and BPO deals. Contrary to popular belief, most organizations still retain a sizable headcount in offshore markets. Now let's, just to clarify, when we say offshore here, we are broadly referring to buyer markets like US, UK, Germany, France, and so on. Within the US, which is the largest services market, right? So costs have definitely gone up, and that's not surprising given the high inflation regime which the market was going through. Although it has cooled down a bit in recent times, and across these markets, we are seeing ongoing cost pressures. On the pricing front, what we have been observing over the past 12 to 18 months is enterprises began pushing back on service provider pricing. This coincided with stronger demand for offshore models, especially given the cost, especially given the need for cost optimization. But despite that trend, there are still many deals where onshore delivery remains essential. For instance, sales support roles or certain processes within healthcare like Medicaid support and etc., where there are strict regulations that limit offshoring. Now, here's where it gets tricky, right? So costs were rising, but many enterprise budgets simply cannot absorb these price increases. So the pressure has shifted to service providers who had become more aggressive in defending their margins. So to deal with that, providers began, or US-based providers began, migrating to or exploring locations in tier two, tier three, even tier four locations in the US, trying to balance out cost with delivery quality. So the goal here was to maintain KPIs and SLAs, even in high pressure commercial environment. So for now, we think pricing pressure will persist and intensify, at least in the near future, which is in the next 6 to 12 months.
Right. Great insights, Vipin. And just want to clarify for our audience, the price trends explained by Vipin till now, specifically for FTE-based pricing, transaction-based pricing or output-based pricing trends follow a different path, and should not be assumed to be in line with what Vipin has explained till now. Vipin, back to you.
Thank you, Rahul, for that clarification. Moving on to the next slide. Now, let's take a look at what's happening across tier one cities globally, spanning across nearshore Europe, APAC, and LATAM markets, right? So, across the board, we are seeing a consistent theme. Delivery costs are surging, and in many cases, they are starting to feel unsustainable. Whether it's salaries, real estate rentals, or even facility overheads, everything is trending upward. In India, traditional delivery hubs like Delhi NCR, Hyderabad, Bangalore have now neared saturation. In Philippines, we are seeing similar trends in Metro Manila. What's happening in these locations is a spike in attrition, primarily because most players are competing for the same talent pool. And this isn't just an India or Philippines story. Mexico and parts of nearshore Europe are starting to feel similar challenges as well. So, what does this mean for outsourcing contracts? In a high cost, high churn environment, it becomes difficult to deliver differentiated value unless providers make deliberate location choices. In the next slide, we have shown one of the strategies that service providers and even enterprises are actively leveraging today is expanding into tier two and tier three locations, right? So these cities still offer relatively competitive operating costs, and importantly, there's less competition for talent. which translates to lower attrition rate. That's a big win because lower attrition rate means lower training and transition cost, and this allows to maintain margin discipline over the long term. Let's take India as an example. We are seeing that operating costs from tier two cities like Kochi, Coimbatore, Jaipur, and amongst others, right, offers a 5 to 7% cost advantage when compared to tier one locations such as the Delhi NCR, Bangalore, or the Mumbai. That arbitrage is quite meaningful, especially when margins are already under pressure from rising wages and flat pricing. As a result, many providers are now seriously evaluating these cities, not just for niche functions, but for mainstream service delivery.
Right. Vipin, one of the questions that we have received from the audience uh, earlier is whether tier two, tier three locations are becoming popular at onshore and nearshore geographies as well. So perhaps you can address that now.
Yes, Rahul, absolutely. Tier 2 and Tier 3 locations are gaining traction not just offshore, but in onshore and nearshore markets as well. We are seeing growing activity in places like Atlanta in the US and in nearshore Europe. Cities like Cluj and Malaga are also gaining traction. We have covered these insights in the next slide. Let me walk our audience through that right now. Moving on to the next slide. So, what we are observing is that locations beyond the traditional tier one cities are gaining significant traction. Service providers are actively setting up new delivery centers across many of these locations. The drivers behind this trend is pretty intuitive, right? Providers are looking to tap into untapped talent pools. They want to avoid intense competition in saturated markets. And of course, they're seeking marginal cost advantages wherever possible. Now, if you look at the list on the slide, right, it's worth calling out a few locations that have gained significant traction over the last 12 to 18 months. For instance, in the US, we are seeing increased activity in Atlanta. Nearshore Europe, cities like Cluj in Romania, Katowice in Poland, Malaga in Spain have emerged as key delivery hubs. So net-net, key factors that's driving the demand for these cities is a combination of talent availability, lower saturation, and strong value cost equation for providers. Over to you, Rahul.
Great. Wonderful insights, Vipin. Thanks for that. If we move on to the next slide, we'll now actually have a look at what is the impact of AI, on deals. But before we jump into that, we actually have our second poll, and this is specific to adoption of the latest buzzword in the industry, which is agentic AI. So again, this is a topic where we are seeing a lot of interest. Enterprises as well as providers are reaching out to us to understand what's the latest and what's the level of adoption of agentic AI. And we'll address that a little bit. But before that, wanted to get the audience's inputs. We close the current poll in about 15 seconds. Okay, so we have the results for that. Okay, very interesting. About 10% of the audience is saying that they have not thought about agentic AI yet. 13% is saying that it's already deployed at scale in their organizations. The balance, 76%, is actually saying uh, enterprises are either planning pilots or they have conducted pilots but not yet moved on to deployment at scale in production. So it's, I think, it's a set of inputs from the audience which we do agree with. Our view is that agentic AI is currently at the stage where generative AI was about 12 months back, which basically means there's a lot of excitement and a lot of experimentation is going on. To some degree, there is also AI washing happening, stuff which is not agentic AI getting labeled as agentic AI. Broadly speaking, we believe agentic AI definitely holds promise. But as the audience also agrees, bulk of the enterprises are in the state of planning and conducting pilots. There are only a handful of examples where it is actually deployed at scale. So, you know, uh, well, while agentic AI is relatively new, in the picture, uh, AI in general is already having a big impact in deal economics. And Saikat, right time for you to come in on that.
Thank you, Rahul. And if we move to the next slide. Okay, so let's begin this section on AI by looking at the major shifts in outsourcing we saw by the end of 2024, right? In 2024, AI, particularly generative AI, had already emerged as one of the prominent levers enhancing resource productivity and driving down total contract value or TCV in managed services deals, right? We tracked two major themes in 2024. First is the resource productivity, and second is the deal TCV. First, we observed that the resource productivity has improved dramatically. With the infusion of automation and GenAI tools like self-healing platforms and AI-enabled chatbots, the average effort per ticket has come down very sharply, right? Additionally, enterprises have made solid progress in process harmonization, things like unified ITSM systems, tighter governance, and real-time monitoring. All of this means fewer issues, faster turnaround, and ultimately less need for expensive manual intervention. A high productivity also means a lower TCV, but other than the productivity lever, there are also other factors that are driving down TCV. We saw much greater competition in the marketplace. We're seeing a higher intensity of participation from the big four consulting firms, OEMs, value added resellers, and more aggressive moves from tier two firms. Structurally, we've also observed a shift towards more bottom heavy delivery pyramids. This means more work is being done by lower cost resources, often non engineering graduates, who are supported by sophisticated platforms. Offshoring has also intensified. 90 to 95% offshore leverage has now become the norm in most transactions. And like we've seen before, there's increased reliance on tier two and tier three cities in India. So overall, even in 2024, we saw that GenAI had already begun reshaping how value is delivered in IT managed services. The outsourcing market clearly had a shakeup of sorts, with deal values contracting and productivity spiking across various outsourcing towers. Let's move on to the next slide and see what GenAI changes we're expecting to see in 2025. So shifting focus to the current year, 2025 is proving to be a year of maturity when it comes to AI solutions. While 2024, like Rahul said, was the year of experimentation, 2025 is expected to be the year when GenAI moves to production in a significant way. GenAI is now inevitably the number one priority across businesses. And naturally, it's also where enterprises are focusing their investments, right? We're beginning to see increased ROI expectations from AI investments. In 2024, a 2.5x return was already considered fairly strong. This year, we may see return expectations rise to 3.5 or 4x, right, as use cases mature and costs begin to normalize. By H2 2024, we'd already begun seeing greater clarity of GenAI use cases, with managed services providers articulating benefits in terms of, say, reduced MTTR, faster turnaround, and tangible productivity gains. This is only expected to improve going into 2025 as service providers cross-pollinate GenAI learnings and knowledges across various accounts. GenAI-related skills like responsible AI officer, GenAI architects, and domain-specific AI data scientists, the roles will continue to command a pricing premium. And like Rahul alluded to before, this is also the year we expect to see early production deployment of agentic AI. Right, agentic AI is the sort of AI that can proactively carry out tasks with minimal human input, and service providers are also enhancing their uh, solutions and platforms across both generative AI as well as agentic AI. Many have developed their proprietary tools, the likes of Accenture GenWizard or HCL's AI Force. But we've also observed in deals that they're equally capable and comfortable building on top of hyperscaler platforms, right? We're talking about platforms like AWS Bedrock, Vertex AI, or Azure Cognitive Services. And to summarize it all, GenAI is expected to become a central and permanent fixture in managed services deals going into 2025, while agentic AI is being seen as an even bigger potential disruptor. At this stage, I'd like to invite Rahul to take the audience through a couple of GenAI case studies from our deal database.
Right. So if you move on to the next slide, please. Yeah. So as indicated by Saikat, there are actually enough and more examples now across various service categories where generative AI is helping achieve the client's objectives. And what we're sharing over here are just a couple of those examples. So the first one essentially pertains to a greenfield implementation of SAP S/4HANA. And in this specific example, the client's goal was to complete the rollout of the greenfield implementation within a timeline of 30 months. Now, this specific bid was won by a global service provider that actually included its own proprietary GenAI solution to accelerate the implementation. The provider was able to articulate the effectiveness of GenAI in reducing the timelines as well as the effectiveness of the use cases. For example, when it comes to coding, which was part of this particular deal, the provider demonstrated how GenAI functionality will help create ABAP code, and assist developers in writing complex business logic. Similarly, GenAI would have tangible impact when it comes to documentation generation, automation of testing, organization change management, as well as training of the end users. Now, in the second example that we're talking about, this is not pertaining to IT services. This was essentially pertaining to third-party risk management, TPRM, as it's called. And in this case, the client was a financial services organization who was currently dealing with fragmented third-party onboarding, manual risk assessment, spreadsheet-heavy due diligence, and reactive monitoring, in its current processes and environment. All of this was leading to issues like inconsistent risk insights, audit issues, delayed onboarding of third-party vendors. Now, in this particular example, a big four consulting firm ultimately won the work, and one of the key differentiators it had was, it proposed a new TPRM solution, with custom-built generative AI-powered features, which included automated vendor discovery and onboarding, AI-driven due diligence and risk assessment, risk mitigation automation, so on and so forth. Importantly, in addition to benefits such as timeline reduction in the SAP implementation case, or let's say faster vendor onboarding and improved risk visibility in the TPRM case, there were definite savings, for the client because of GenAI leverage specifically. Now, obviously, GenAI comes at a cost, but the savings which were articulated and demonstrated, because of the inclusion of GenAI were much more. So if you look at it, the ROI in the SAP implementation example was more than 3.5x. And in the TPRM example, the ROI was more than 2.5x. So, just wanted to share some of these really impressive case studies, but at the same time mention that these are not isolated by any standards. In today's contemporary deals, be it IT application maintenance, IT infrastructure, be it different types of BPO services, we are seeing, a lot of good examples of Gen AI being leveraged. Second, back to you.
Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, some great insights there, Rahul. Thank you for sharing those case studies with us. Let's switch up tracks a little bit and let's look at how the Gen AI themes that we've talked about are playing out in terms of KPIs, right? We're seeing enterprises develop a more nuanced KPI structure to measure the value of Gen AI. From a tech KPI standpoint, metrics like AI response accuracy, confidence scores, and document automation percentages are now being tracked and reported. On the business side, we're seeing varying metrics like CSAT scores, reduction in ART, development velocity gain, etc. There's also a strategic layer being measured, things like return on AI investment and innovation indices. Finally, governance and compliance KPIs are playing a big role, such as measuring privacy compliance, breach detection, and so on. This robust approach to metrics is honestly critical, not just for ensuring responsible deployment, but for aligning AI investments with actual business outcomes. Let's move on to the next section and talk about some pricing model innovations. Okay, so now let's take a couple of minutes to talk about our predictions around evolution of pricing models as GenAI becomes more mature and proven across industries. As AI solutions evolve, traditional TNM and fixed fees models might become less effective. What we expect to see in the future are next-gen pricing models that move beyond input-based billing and focus more on outcomes, value, and risk sharing. The first shift would be towards measurable outcomes. Clients aren't just buying hours or resources, they're buying results. Providers are being asked to link pricing to clearly defined business KPIs in this regard. The second major trend is transparency in AI usage. As GenAI systems take on more responsibilities, clients expect visibility around the actual volume of AI usage. Pricing models will evolve to reflect this approach, right? And pricing metrics will eventually be linked to actual volume of AI utilization. Thirdly, we expect to see eventually a model where the AI underpinning is abstracted out for the final customer, right? And the customer only pays for the volume of GenAI delivered content. Of course, right now with GenAI being relatively new and outcomes being unclear, fixed fees is the more dominant construct that we've seen in the market. And we've also seen some amount of risk sharing mechanisms, such as, the typical fees at risk model. However, the demand for advanced pricing models will only grow as enterprises look for more accountability and higher ROI in an AI augmented world. Let's go to the next slide. And let's close this section out by talking about how Gen AI is impacting deal dynamics in real time, right? And we're talking both in terms of managed services as well as transformation programs. Like we've said in earlier slides, one of the most notable impacts of Gen AI is in terms of productivity levels. Providers are showing improvements of up to 50% over the life of a deal, particularly in high volume rule based functions such as service desk. We've also seen that the team compositions are changing. Traditional delivery roles are now being blended with Gen AI specialists embedded directly into operational teams. On the tooling front, we're seeing AI workflows within ITSM platforms like ServiceNow that are able to resolve L1 tickets without any human intervention. Switching focus to the transformation side, Gen AI accelerators are leading to lower TCVs for the same scope of delivery, same scope of work that we're delivering. Gen AI is enabling faster implementation, be it SAP rollouts, software configurations, or integration work. In some cases, timelines are being reduced by as much as 50%. And underpinning all this is the shift towards value-linked pricing models. Clients want to see direct alignment between AI-driven gains and what they pay. I would like to conclude this section by saying that generative AI is not just a support layer, it's an architectural driver influencing everything from service design to contracting. Back to you, Rahul.
Thanks, Ekad. So if we summarize the discussion till now, a couple of important points that we wanted to highlight. Firstly, the macro environment is tough, and as a result, the IT or BPO industry is still seeing low single-digit growth rates. Second, FT pricing is seeing decline across many locations and service categories. Third, AI is having a major impact on productivity improvement. All of these factors have set the stage for a situation where we see material reduction in deal TCVs. In fact, some of the latest information coming from deals signed in the last, I'll say, 4 to 5 weeks, there are some very startling numbers. For example, in one case, a traditionally premium positioned consulting services provider, shifted gears in its pricing, when it announced, a significantly reduced rate card for winning, application development scope of work, with a US bank, with rates which were essentially falling at or even below some of the 20th percentile value, benchmarks for different types of roles. In another example, in a cybersecurity contract, this was with a European healthcare company. A global service provider agreed to reduce pricing below the 20th percentile values for even the premium security service, such as identity and access management, privileged access management, threat hunting. And in yet another example, a tier one global services provider, which was in a renewal situation, with with a BPO contract, with it reduced the rate cards by 7 to 35%, in order to win that renewal. So clear signs that, because of the way the industry is currently positioned and because of the level of efficiencies that can be derived, providers are getting really aggressive to win newer deals or even renewals for that matter. Okay, so that kind of takes us to the next section, in which we will cover trends pertaining to the software and cloud space. To begin with, let's explore, how the software and cloud market is undergoing a fundamental transformation, and this is driven by a combination of 4 factors. Number one, there is a wide-scale transition from on-premise version of software to SaaS versions. Secondly, we are seeing a lot of software platforms, such as Salesforce, coming up with industry-aligned solutions. For example, Salesforce has, now an FS cloud for insurance clients. It has got a healthcare cloud, etc. And this is not it's not only restricted to Salesforce. We are seeing similar changes happen even with other software vendors. Third, a lot of SaaS platforms are now AI powered, and customers are actively evaluating, the AI features in those platforms. Fourth, the last 12 months or even 18 months have been marked by a spate of acquisitions. For example, VMware getting acquired by Broadcom, Splunk getting acquired by Cisco, Juniper getting acquired by HPE. Now, all of these together are having a pretty big impact on the way commercials are playing out in the software and cloud space. We'll have a deeper look at some of these factors in the next couple of slides. Yeah, so when it comes to the transition from on-premise deployments to cloud-native SaaS models, the right way to think about it is that it's not merely a technology shift which is happening. It's a technology shift as well as a commercial shift. It obviously serves some important pain points, which the clients used to earlier have. For example, the difficulty in managing the underlying IT infrastructure, having to devote, a dedicated, team of people who would be managing the infra or the upgrades to the software, So all of that gets taken care of, the moment the software moves on to the cloud. But then beyond that, it also is resulting in a material increasing in the spending, often to the tune of 40 to 65%, when that move to SaaS happens. And there can be some justified reasons for that to happen. For example, the cost of the IT infrastructure, the cost for hosting the infrastructure within the data center, the energy costs, they're all now getting incurred by the provider. The key question, however, remains whether the proposed price hike, is that fair or is it too high? In such cases, conducting price benchmarking is a good strategy that buyers can adopt. For example, recently we were working with a client, which is essentially a financial services company, which had an HRIS platform, called Chronos, and this was essentially in an on-premise model. Now, the vendor, which was UKG, was pushing the client to adopt the newer version of the software, which was on SaaS. And the price increase, which we saw being proposed by the vendor in this case, was close to 63%, which is a pretty high number. Now, in this case, the client engaged us to perform a price benchmarking of the latest, version of the software, which was hosted on SaaS, by the same vendor. The benchmarking essentially helped us identify a savings potential of 12%. So, ultimately there was a price increase, no doubt, because of the move from on-premise to SaaS. But net, the price increase was now within reasonable limits, and the client definitely saw savings, because of this kind of a benchmarking happening. If you move to the next slide, when it comes to artificial intelligence, AI, it's not just a buzzword anymore. We already saw the kind of impact it's having in IT and BPO services. And in fact, that impact is not restricted to that particular area. It's now even coming onto the software domain. So AI is redefining how enterprise software is built, how it is priced, how it is purchased. Vendors are specifically introducing AI modules as add-ons, many times having a premium price for that, and higher value derived by the client, improved performance of the software. Those are factors cited as supporting, this kind of a premium pricing for the AI modules. So this has led to a shift from traditional seat-based pricing to demand-based and value-based pricing models, even for enterprise software. For some enterprises, it actually brings in some flexibility, whereas for other enterprises, this actually leads to a greater degree of complexity in evaluating, whether they need to go in for these features or not. Importantly, this is essentially leading to a lot of changes in the contracts themselves. Clients are negotiating new clauses to address the impact of AI on data privacy, looking at things like IP rights, as well as performance metrics. SLA and KPI frameworks are evolving, with AI-enabled platforms expected to deliver quantifiable outcomes. So in short, AI is not only altering the technology experience, it's rewriting the commercial playbook itself, as far as software and cloud vendors are concerned. Now, if you move to the next slide, what this means is, on the one hand, enterprises are facing constrained budgets, keeping in mind the tough macroeconomic conditions that exist in the market today. On the other hand, because of all of these changes happening, the spend on cloud, the spend on software is typically increasing beyond the expectations of the enterprises. So enterprises have realized that they must manage this increased spend by looking at two important dimensions. The first is managing the quantity of licenses, also known as the queue. Uh, and this essentially begins with centralizing demand. As of now, a lot of enterprises are operating in silos, with each business unit buying its own software, its own tools. So by consolidating the volume or the usage of such kind of software and tools at an enterprise level, organizations can negotiate better rates and reduce wastage. The next lever that they're utilizing is right sizing, because not every user needs the most expensive version of a particular product. Through proper persona profiling, it's possible to map the right edition or the right version of the software to the right role. Next, we also recommend assessing the software footprint of the organization for duplication, because many teams actually use very similar tools having similar features, and this leads to excess procurement, of different types of software, and a lot of wastage. So identifying and retiring some of the redundant tools, redundant software is a quick win for many enterprises. Next, there's also this concept of gold plating, which basically means that all applications end up having, let's say, the highest level of support, the highest level of levels of SLAs. And many times that's not required. It's only the critical applications, for which such high SLAs are needed. But for the non-critical ones, it makes sense to reduce the support levels or SLA levels. And that leads to material savings. And lastly, progressive ramp-up plans is also something which can help, avoid overcommitting upfront, costs and allowing room for adjustment based on the way the usage of software ramps up over time within an organization. So net, no point of procuring a new software with the peak number of licenses right from day one. It's actually better to go in with a small number of licenses and then increase them gradually, as the usage increases. Now, with regard to the next dimension, which is P, or the price, our recommendation is that enterprises should start by getting the contract right. The contract typically has different types of terms and conditions and clauses, but many times they are kind of oriented in favor of the vendor. So there are measures such as introducing price protection clauses, introducing change of control provisions, having COLA-based annual escalators in pricing, which can help maintain predictability of the spend and manage the long-term risk. Secondly, and like we have discussed earlier, it's important to benchmark the pricing for the software licenses, knowing how your specific quote compares with what the market norms are, and understanding the value premium attached to different features is key to getting an optimum contract. And thirdly, it's vital to understand different types of discounts that might be available. These could be volume-based discounts, tenure-based discounts, or even bundled incentives. So many clients do not realize just how much room there is to negotiate. So smartest buyers typically approach licensing not just as a procurement task, but as a lever to derive cost efficiency overall. Now, with that, let's look at some of the key takeaways from today's webinar. Point number one is, as we discussed in the beginning, margin pressures have really intensified in 2025 as rising offshore costs continue to outpace pricing increases. And as a result, providers' profitability is getting squeezed. Point number two, we are seeing that having 90 to 95% of offshore leverage is now almost a standard across different types of managed services situations. And this is essentially is a definitive shift in the delivery strategies as compared to how the norms were, let's say, about 2 years back. Third, generative AI and macro headwinds are driving price sensitivity. And we have seen deal TCVs coming under real pressures, and we have seen a lot of aggressive pricing postures by providers. Point number four, enterprise ROI expectations on Gen AI investments are increasing. They used to be about 2.5, 3x till now, but we are seeing evidence of them increasing to about 4x. And this is driven by the growing maturity in various Gen AI use cases, as well as lower risks. And lastly, software and SaaS pricing has inflated significantly, with annual spend increasing by about 40 to 65%. Among other levers, we believe benchmarking is critical for enterprises to realize material savings of up to even 15% in actual deal scenarios. Okay, we will move on to the Q&A section. All right, we have received a few questions. I think I'll ask Vipin to take up the first one. The question is, are BPO services expected to shift further toward newer geographies to drive cost savings? Vipin, any thoughts on this?
Yes, Rahul. There's a clear and accelerating shift in BPO services towards alternate delivery locations, right? Primarily driven by cost escalation and talent saturation and high attrition that they're seeing in traditional tier one cities. Locations like Bangalore, Manila, Krakow are increasingly becoming expensive and competitive. In response, service providers are expanding into tier two and tier three locations like Jaipur, Kochi, Cluj, Malaga, Katowice, Medellin, etc. These locations offer more favorable cost structures, relatively untapped talent pool, and lower market saturations.
All right. I think let's take up the next question. This basically pertains to how are teams protecting their top line when clients are not willing to pay for value addition, but they are expecting a significant revenue optimization due to Gen AI or agentic AI? Saikat, any thoughts that you have on this?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Rahul. Like we have explained throughout the webinar, we're observing downward pressure on deal TCV with smaller, shorter deals being signed, right? In simple terms, as things stand, buyers have a lot of power in the market. Service providers are betting on more deal volume to compensate for the lowered deal TCV in the current scenario. We're also seeing many service providers going with a land and expand approach as far as implementing AI is concerned. What they do is they're willing to do AI POCs before the buyers commit to a full-on investment in AI. Many service providers may also be open to outcome-driven pricing approach, where they're willing to allocate some fees at risk to AI outcomes to seal the deal. So that's essentially the approach that service providers are taking to mitigate the issues around revenue optimization due to Gen AI and agentic AI.
Okay, thank you. I'm just skimming through some of the additional questions. In the meanwhile, Saikat, if you could please also talk about the complimentary offer that we have for the audience today.
Yeah, so let's quickly go to the next slide. And over here, we want to share a message with our audience, right? So you can sign up for a complimentary price check, which would essentially allow you to gauge your current status against market and figure out if there is value willing to be unlocked in your contracted FTE rates. To sign up, you can just click on the link, which is now available on the chat window. You can choose one of the functions between IT applications, IT service desk, and contact center. And within the selected functions, you can select up to 2 roles for which you want the price benchmarks. Also, against the selected function and role, you can choose two out of the list of 6 countries that you see on the screen. And once we receive the final details, we will share the relevant price benchmarks with you. Handing it back to you, Rahul, for the last couple of slides.
Yes, I also take up one additional question, which is basically what are the trends with regard to shifts in duration of contracts given the rapid rate of capability change? So it's a very interesting question, keeping in mind the pace at which technology is advancing, AI is advancing. A lot of buyers today are not going in for the traditional approach of having, 5-year deals with extensions on top. If I have to kind of call out what is the most common deal tenure that is visible in the current times, it would be a 3-year deal term, with the option to have 1-year extensions. Sometimes it's +1, sometimes it's +1 and another +1. But net, it's a pretty important change. Which is there in the industry. So it's a really interesting question that has been called out. Okay. Now, I think as we kind of move towards the end, I wanted to also talk about, the fact that, we keep on publishing a lot of insightful blogs on our website, which pertain to some of these changing, which are happening in the industry overall and specifically on digital transformation as well. So we encourage the audience to bookmark, essentially our blogs page in order to get the latest perspectives, the latest thoughts on these topics. And, with that, we will wrap up this webinar. If you have any further questions or would like to discuss cost and pricing trends, please reach out to Vipin, Saikat, or myself. So thank you very much for your time today. Have a great day, great evening.